Today we have Will, the founder of Dyad. Hopefully, I spelled the correctly, like Dyad. Sometimes I feel even like I said dad or something. I'm still kind of with the name. Sorry, Will. Will is an amazing kind of like founder. Like he also like building like open source like AI builder. You've seen there was a kind of AI website builders, Lovable, Vizero, a bunch of them popping up left and right. Dyad, but do it different way, more like open source way. You can download it in your desktop, and it's amazing. I've been using it for days. I'm loving it. Honestly, Will ship very fast, and we appreciate what he's doing. He's building a great community. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Abu. I really appreciate it.
Will, like my first question, and I always ask people like why they left their job. Like, I mean, you've been like 10 years, not 10 years, probably 9 years at Google,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
now we jump at ship. I don't say jump ship, but like kind of more like the founder way. Why?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of people ask me this because, like when I was working at Google, it was, a great job. And I feel really thankful, really blessed to have the opportunity and learned a ton. But, it was a kind of like a huge risk. And I think it started off with just a conversation with my wife where, she was basically saying, I actually think this is like not a crazy idea, and was really supportive of me trying this. And I think what ended up happening was towards the end of my time at Google, I was basically working on these like 20% projects, right, that Google's known for. And I was doing one that was open source, and it was actually a UI framework where you could write your UI all in Python without writing JavaScript. But the thing was like, this was never like a top priority for my organization. And I wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial, building something new versus, at Google, there's just a lot of, really good, but like mature projects and that it was just something else, just this itch that I wanted to do. And so I had sort of like been building on the side, and eventually I was like, okay, I want to try something new. And obviously everyone is seeing all the crazy stuff that you could do with AI coding and how much potential there was. And so that was sort of the springboard of what led me to leave Google and go on this journey here.
Oh, that's awesome! Like, and just guys, like, just for reference, before the call, we talked about like we kind of have different mindset, like startup mindset. I had a couple of friends like who worked at Google, worked at even at big firms, but their mindset still more like operate differently. Like, we'll ship very fast. I think every week I've seen a couple of updates. I go to Reddit community, and then what's the new, like something like that, like kind of. So how, like, for example, within Google, like, is there like kind of, for example, like you said, like 20%? Is there like people like kind of who operate like a startup, like at startup speed, and some people? You just can you break that for me? Or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Google is such a big company, and like there's just like so many different teams and styles. But like, when I was doing a 20% project, it was basically me and this other guy, and we were basically building this project together. And we were, super nimble. We would just like come up with ideas and then ship it, and then talk to our users, our community, and figure out what to do. And I think that's just sort of like to me, like you're mentioning like why do I release so often Dyad. I think it's important, like one is that like it helps me be motivated, right? Like on Monday I think about, okay, like this is what I want to ship for the users. And when you start thinking about like, okay, what I want to do 3 months from now, 6 months from now, like things are changing so quickly, especially in the AI space, that I think it's good to be really grounded of like, okay, what can I deliver, still thinking about like, okay, there are some longer term things and it'll take multiple weeks, multiple releases, but how can I get something out to users, and how can I hear, like what's working for them? Because oftentimes what I'll realize is like, oh, this was a huge pain point, I didn't realize it, or this thing is like not really like nobody cares about it, and you don't need to spend more time making it perfect. So I think there's this aspect of just try to get as much feedback as you can. And there's definitely teams at Google that do this, but I think it really ranges in, like obviously being by myself, there's just very little bottleneck. That's just like, as quickly as it can, just getting out to users.
awesome! Like, and speaking, like, since you mentioned the diet, I'm still with the name, that diet.
Yeah.
Since you
Yeah,
mentioned,
anything is
yeah,
good.
since you mentioned about diet, like why the open source? Like, have you tried other, for example, tools already before building this one? Because like I feel like diet like was I shouldn't say it's like well thought, like design, like kind of like options, like kind of you don't need to get locked into kind of other
Yeah.
AIs or LLMs, or like a lot of them they just wrap it up. Yeah, I don't know, like are they using Claude? Are they using Google? I don't know, like kind of how is like come of the idea and why the open source?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I think definitely there's tons of like AI app builders as you're mentioning, and I was using one of them, like one of the really well known ones. And one thing that I found really frustrating was like I got this thing and it was like 80% good. I was building this like Bible reading app for fun, but then I got some bugs, and then the problem was like, okay, I was like, I'm an engineer, so I can just change the code. But when I pulled it down, it wouldn't run because there was something special that they were doing, right? Like, and I think it's just like when you don't build things that are open source, right? When you build things that are on the cloud, you end up getting to all these weird issues. And I don't think there's any bad intention here, right? I think like, that company, they have good intentions, but it's just easy to make some assumptions about, how things are supposed to run. And by making things local and open source, like I basically guarantee like, things will never be locked in. Like, for example, like I plan to work on Dyad, hopefully, like for many years. But even if I shut down Dyad tomorrow, like you have Dyad, the software, and you won't be locked in because you have Dyad, you can do whatever you want, all your code's on your computer. And I think that's the kind of tool that I want, right? Where it's like, no matter what happens to this company, like the code is your code, your app is your app, and you can do whatever you want. And by having an open source, so like let's say someone has better ideas. And I have seen already, like this week, people are building really interesting features that I never thought of. And you give space for innovation. So I think to me, that was the reason of like making something open, which is we don't need probably like the 51st, proprietary cloud-based AI app builders. I think there's definitely a space for cloud-based AI app builders. I think there's a lot of benefits that they have, but I think there's also a lot of benefits for doing things like free, local, and open source. And when you think about like, for example, like as an engineer, everyone's heard of like VS Code. It's so popular. And I think if it wasn't open source, I don't think it would be nearly as successful because you need that rich ecosystem to really have something compelling. And then, like I think you can do things on the cloud, but for a lot of people, especially if you have faster machines, it's going to give you a better experience if you can do things locally. And this is where you see like, like you can run VS Code in a browser, but I do think it's like, for me, like I use VS Code in a computer, it just feels a lot snappier and smooth. And I think, other people feel similarly about app builders too.
Oh, that's awesome. Like speaking of like the cloud versus like something locally, like from business perspective,
Yeah.
for the cloud you will have more probably users because like for example when I installed for example Diet, like I'm using it, you need to install some environments,
Yeah.
kind of like sometimes like even for example that like let's say comment just to prompt something like download some kind of I don't know like a node or and like for the
Yeah.
other road it's like you have more access to more like I would say non-technical users, like some people just vibe coding or just like I don't know prototyping. What are your thoughts on that, like kind of is it
Yeah.
just you target people who can build or developers or
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and something that like I was worried about too, right? Like just having people like install Node.js, was this going to scare off all the users, and like was it going to be like, okay, you have to be an engineer to use the tool? And what I found very interesting was when I was looking at Reddit, like for example, like there's a subreddit called ChatGPT coding, and a lot of people there are not engineers, right? Like they don't know how to write, like 100 lines of JavaScript, but they are very technically savvy. Like for example, they've downloaded Cursor, they've done npm install, they've done all these things, so they've built apps, right? And it's not like they've never used a terminal. Um, and I saw there's this niche where like, okay, if they're reaching for Cursor for these more powerful tools, and Cursor really isn't the vibe coding tool, it's really I think meant for engineers. When you talk to the, you hear the founders talk about it, but they're reaching for those tools because they want that power. They like things local. They like to have that flexibility. So I do think like for the cloud-based AI app builders, they're going to be way easier to access. Like you just go to a browser and things work. But I do think there's actually a pretty big niche of people who are not engineers, because most of the ad users are not engineers. They don't know how to write a web app by hand by coding it, but they are tech savvy, and I think that is the kind of like the sweet spot of what we're trying to reach.
oh that's cool like and we like I think before the call I mentioned like yeah for to me like you are winning because like I think you are doing it right. I feel the community growing fast every time. Oh, like 1,000 now people. Like, oh, maybe you should update in your website. I think it says
Yeah,
600 or
yeah,
something.
I need to do
Yeah, yeah. Like,
that.
speaking of winning, like, what's your biggest win or kind of like surprise? I think even when you launched it on product handles, like, it's a big love there. Everybody kind of like upvoting it.
Yeah.
What's your biggest win like so far?
Yeah, I mean, now that you mentioned Product Hunt, like I was like, definitely blown away by that, because that was my first time launching a Product Hunt, and I'd read all these things like people put tons of effort, and I was sort of like doing it kind of last minute, where like the week before I was like planning out, okay, how do I do this? But I think what was helpful about the Product Hunt launch was that there was already this like community of users, especially on Reddit, and I think that was actually like the big win I had, which is like I put this post on the subreddit called No Code, um, and it's about these like no code builders. And I basically said, hey, like I'm this ex Google engineer. I built this thing. It's only like 2 weeks old, so it had a lot of missing features. But I'd love to just get your feedback, and I'd also be happy to just spend 30 minutes helping you with AI coding. So it doesn't have to be Dyad specific. And I think that itself was really interesting, really compelling, and it kind of like blew up in that subreddit and actually got people to like make videos about Dyad in like different countries. So it was kind of crazy. And the reason why that was so helpful was those were the like exact users that I wanted to reach, right? Because I had actually created this earlier version of Dyad, and it was for engineers, and basically nobody was interested because engineers had Cursor, they had all these other tools, they have 1,000 different tools, and what I had realized was like, okay, the people who really want something were these non-engineers, and they wanted something more powerful, right, than the traditional no coding tool, but they want something easier than like the VS Code and Cursors of the world. And getting to that subreddit community and getting traction helped me get that initial base of users. And they were basically the ones who were saying like, hey, well, can you do this? Can you do Superbase? And I added Superbase like a week or two later. And it was like, hey, can you do mobile app support? And then later mobile app support came. So it was those kind of like really kind of early users, really just, passionate and gave a lot of feedback. I think that was helpful. And oftentimes it was like, hey, like, I'm confused. Like, why is this not working? Why is that not working? And there was just a lot of bugs that I was fixing, and having people use it, meaningfully was sort of like the feel. And again, that's sort of why I've, really been keen on shipping, soon, because you want to hear from the users, from the community. Otherwise, you're just building in a vacuum. You're not sure if what you're building is valuable.
For sure, for sure. Like I totally agree with this one. Like since you mentioned, like for example, like users are not technical. There's like a lot of
Mm,
challenge with it. Like that includes, for example, beyond like for example, installing like or I would say like the integration part, probably like how do you see this space is going, like because I had also like another another kind of podcast with Hey Boss CEO,
yeah.
and at that time she mentioned like a lot of users they just want to build the product. There is a phase where kind of experiment, you just vibe code, okay, I made this calculator, I made this website, and there is phase where people want to really ship a product. I think that
Yeah.
at least this field is heading there. How do you see kind of I don't know, like 5 years from now, diet, how it looks like? Kind of, is it like one prompt, everything, including integration? And for example,
Yeah.
even Replit, they try to sell their from their angle, like all the integration, all kind of like technical nonsense. I shouldn't say nonsense, but I'm not technical much. Like, I mean, it looks like to me like that kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's like a super interesting question because, like, once you build an app, like the next step is like, how do I share it, right? You have to deploy it, and that itself is actually like, quite a bit, right? Like, so for example, like I have a step-by-step guide, I have YouTube videos, walking people, how do you push to GitHub, how do you deploy to Vercel. But I think one thing to keep in mind, right, is that like some of the users have never used GitHub before, right? So you actually have to explain like, okay, you have projects, like what is pushing. And the way we've tried to approach this in Dyad is like make it easier, right? So it's like if you told someone go open a terminal and do a git commit and do git push, you might lose half of the people, right? You probably even more than half. But by saying like, okay, there's a step-by-step guide, there's a video, and there's a button in the UI saying, like go log into GitHub. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So we can create an account. And then now we're going to create a repo, hit another button. And now when you want to push changes, you hit another button, right? And then I think the part is that like, people will want to do something more complicated. They want to like start collaborating on repos. They want to have like multiple branches. And the thing about having it, again, like free, local, and open source is that like you can just use other tools. There's no lock and all. You can use the GitHub desktop app, which is a pretty nice GUI for doing Git stuff. So I think that's sort of like one angle of integration is like you want to make it easier. But then like another angle is that like, with the Supabase stuff, um, it is awesome for getting started, right? Like, okay, like you can set up database, you can do authentication, you can have like server functions. But then the next question I got, one of my like, first customers and really heavy power users was like, okay, I built this thing, it's getting complicated. I want to have like other users, like actual customers using my tool. How do I make sure I don't like, break production? Um, and that is a good question. And that is like the kind of stuff that like a software engineer is like, you spend a lot of time sweating that. It's like, okay, how do you keep production stable? And there's a lot of ways of like managing this, right? You have like different branches. You might have like a development database or in a production database, and you want to make changes to development before you push to production and so forth. And I think like one of the big keys, and this is like one of the things I'm like working on like literally right now, is how do we make these safe engineering practices approachable and understandable and usable by non-technical people. And again, these people are like tech savvy, they're really sharp, they know how to build things. And like this person approached me saying, how do I do this, right? And I think this is the part where like I have some ideas. It's still a little bit early to like get into the details, but like for example, like one idea is that if you look at like Neon database, like you can actually branch databases. So you can have like a development branch and a production branch. So you can like not accidentally ruin stuff in production while you're just tinkering with things. And so that is like one direction that, like I'm actively investigating in.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Like again, we appreciate you shipping fast, like, and even sharing these videos. I feel like also like I've seen, for example, like I shouldn't say similar style, Lovable, for example. Also, they try to build
Mm,
community. They even like launch these kind of hackathons. I
yeah.
think the future could be huge, actually, honestly, like for that, like especially like I think for now probably you're making these videos, but I think it's gonna come time where a lot of people are gonna be making these videos. It's gonna pop up on in YouTube. It's gonna be everywhere. Like I think it's one of the points you mentioned, like for example, this kind of educating. I feel like a lot, especially with every AI, a lot of people need upskilling. I think this one, like I could see if it was diet, like maybe installed in schools, or I don't know, like teaching kids, or
Mm, mm.
I don't know, it could be like, I think they should. Me personally, I think I would love, like for example, if I'm a kid, like and there is some, I don't know, it could be even a lesson. I don't know. I'm just saying, like kind of maybe I'm
Yeah,
just too
yeah.
excited about it. Speaking
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
vision and like, what's like your goals for at least this year or next 5 years? Like kind of you see diet like could be like. Maybe for me, I'm
Yeah.
already like gave my vision. I don't know my own vision.
No, I mean, there are so many interesting paths to go from here. Like, I think, like in the like short term, there's sort of like like making the branching databases, making things more stable, and improving things. And I think that will continue, you know, to be worked on. But like something I'm excited for, later this year is sort of building this ecosystem. Like you're talking about this community aspect, and when you're building apps right now with AI, what everybody's doing is sort of like prompting from scratch. It's like I give you a blank page and now you go build everything. But like, what if you just need a dashboard? You need login. You need like some very standard stuff, and it doesn't really make sense to like have to redo that. And there's a really standard way of doing this as software engineers, right? You basically have packages that you reuse, but I think the problem right now is that like this is a pretty high barrier, right? It's like how do I, create these reusable pieces of my vibe coded apps? I don't think there's like a great solution right now. And this is something that I'm excited to sort of like experiment and work on it with the community, is saying like, okay, how can we have this hub of different, blocks, reusable like Lego pieces. So you can say like, okay, I want this piece over there, I want that piece over there. And now I've created something new, like the world has never seen before, but I didn't have to, write like 30 different prompts just to build some very standard UI. I could actually reuse things that are off the shelf and then customize it on top of AI for the things that I want to care about. So that is like one particular vision that I'm keen on exploring.
Oh, that's definitely great. One of the things that just like pop up to my head like now,
Yeah.
and I've seen even that Hey Boss, a bunch of like others talking about pricing. Like one of the like these kind of like AI builders, and yours is unique because like people can just plug their own APIs, and I feel like a lot of them they still experiment with the pricing. What do you think?
Yeah.
Not just about diet, like about the whole field.
Yeah, I mean, pricing is a huge topic right now, and like when you go into different subreddits for different AI, like coding products, this is like probably like the most talked about thing. And there's a lot of um, people are not super happy, and I think what happened right was like in the like kind of like the like early wave of AI, people were just saying like, okay, we need to create something, we want to get tons of users, and a lot of these startups were VC backed, and I think they were willing to grow. Really rapidly and maybe like subsidize some of their growth with their VC funding. I don't have any inside knowledge, but this is sort of I think like a pretty common assumption is like, okay, they're spending tons of money, and AI is, as you probably know, like just like super expensive, right? Like when you want to build these apps, you're just spending all these money on tokens, and if you want to use the most powerful models, those are even more expensive. So I think in this whole space, like what you're sort of seeing is a realignment, right? And like one thing that I've seen, and it's not just one tool, but like multiple tools, is like they're going from this model of like you get X messages a month, right, to basically saying you get Y credits. And the shift is happening because, you know, I think originally it's like, why do people have messages? Like, well, that's really easy to track, right? I write a message, you know, you subtract one message, and that's very straightforward. But the problem is, like, if you have a message that's really complicated, the AI could be doing 10 times as much work. And if you have a huge app, again, it's doing way more work than if you're doing Hello World, right? And I think like what you see is like companies are like, okay, it doesn't really make sense to cross subsidize, right? Like if someone's saying like change this text color to blue versus someone's like, let me build a brand new like Airbnb clone, right? Like we should probably charge it differently because the AI costs are so different. And I think this is where you're seeing a realignment and also some pain point, because as companies are basically trying to probably like have, you know, reasonable margins, you're having things tweaked. And I think just a little bit about Dyad, which is, you know, like Dyad is free. You can use your own API keys, and that'll always be the case. There's never going to be, you know, any plans to take that away. But like, if you don't want to juggle your own API keys, you don't want to have like your Gemini, you don't want to have your Anthropic API keys. What you can do is basically pay Dyad Pro for the subscription. And the model that we've done is like not say you get X messages because of the whole issue of like each message can cost very differently. Instead, we give you, you know, a fixed set of credits, right, which you can kind of like map to like being, you know, Y dollars. And then the thing that we've done really hard in Dyad is to give you a lot of choice, right? Like a lot of like AI tools, you have to use one model or just whatever model that they give you, right? And what we want to say is like, okay, you can use any model you want, right? You can basically use like Gemini 2 Flash, which is really capable, but like way more affordable than the frontier models. You can use DeepSeek, you know, which is again like a great value. It's open source, and we basically give people a lot of different options. And I think is really beneficial because, you know, let's say you can get a model that's 80% as good as the top tier model. So it's still very capable, but it can be like, you know, 5 times cheaper. And we want to give users the option, say like, okay, if you're willing to try something a little bit less good, you can get way more. And then the final thing that we're trying to do is to say like, maybe you don't want to think about like, okay, is this a hard AI request? Is it an easy AI request? Should I pick a cheap model or expensive model? Right? That gets annoying. And so what we did, you know, we basically added a feature which is called like Smart Auto, which is saying like, okay, if you have something hard, right, like fix this very complicated architecture issue, we're going to use the best model available. Now, if you want something like, again, like changing the font size, you don't need the best model. You know, a much smaller model, faster model can take care of that, and we basically will route to the right model. So I think there's a bunch of things that we're trying to do because at the end of the day, like our goal is to have people build as much as you can, but AI costs are expensive. So how do we balance it out? And I think there's a bunch of techniques like this, and there's other things that we're doing to optimize, but this is a little bit.
I was always thinking like, I use Canva and like Figma
Mm,
and those kind of, like, does it always have to be like using AI? For example, I'm very stupid, honestly. Like, I'm just like, for
no.
example, let's say, for example, when you generate something like, but when you edit it, like, do you need always like tokens? Is there like a way where, for example, if you change font, do you need like every time it has to use tokens? Like, I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to be like, is there, or we could head to a system where just, I don't know, Canva, like for example, Canva or Figma, that was before even the LLMs, you can edit, let's say, size
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or drag and drop like Webflow or something. There is some
Yeah.
time where the AI can generate, but when the editing, let's say, at least styles or something, do you think the future could be a tool that doesn't spend tokens on at least colors or fonts or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's a good idea, and I've seen other tools, you know, do something like this where it's like, yeah, if you want to just like tweak the padding, the font sizes,
yeah, yeah.
you can do that without AI. And I think it's a good idea. And I think this is the kind of thing where like at some point I think we should do it in Dyad. I think there's definitely like no downside. I think the one thing to sort of like in my mind to keep in mind is like if we take care of all those things, right, like the font sizes, because right now, like for example, like if you want to edit the font size, you can like point and click to the UI and edit that, and that is really cheap because the edit is
Hmm.
basically saying, "We'll send that one file. We're not going to send the whole code base. We send one file, and you can edit." So that's already pretty cheap, anyways. And I think so. The one thing is like, besides the really easy stuff, can we do other stuff without AI? And I think that's like a big question, and I don't know. And I think this is where I kind of go back to like the earlier idea of like if you have these reusable blocks, right? So like let's say you have like a sign-in page or like a pricing table, right? There's these things that like a lot of people have in some variation, and if you can basically say like, let me just grab this and put it in, right? Like, and
Hmm.
then finally, I'll just you know do some adjustment just to make sure it looks like my theme, looks like my branding. I could maybe save you like 10 prompts because rather than building these things like step by
Hmm.
step, you basically just grab something and then you just do this final tweak. So I think that to me like could give you more bang for your buck. But this is again like a little bit more experimental. I'm not sure like this has really been proven out. But I think it's interesting to see all the different ideas that people are doing here.
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, like it could be like a mix. I don't know, like future products, like where drag and drop elements plus the AI generation kind of more like a hybrid kind of system.
Yeah.
Speaking of like future, and you mentioned also some kind of VC backed, like, are you like planning to fundraise? Because I feel like your company is like a fundable kind of, or maybe some people like reached out to you to kind of to invest. Like, are you fundraising, or you are not caring about the money? Are you rich? Like, I don't.
Yeah, no, so like I do have a bit of savings just working at Google for a while. I feel blessed to have the opportunity, but this is very much like where I'm trying to, this is again open source, but I'm trying to build it as a business, something sustainable. And right now, like I'm not looking to fundraise because I know that can take a ton of time. I think my goal is really just to like, build something that is sustainable. Like it doesn't have to be a unicorn, it doesn't have to be the fastest growing, but something that I'm able to work on and hopefully a small team can work on, for a long period of time. And I think building something that users are willing to pay for, that you have customers, I think is like a really organic and healthy way of building a business. And that is what we're focused on. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And just for the record, you're just currently
Yeah.
the one person, one man show, like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this.
So right now it's basically just me. There's like a couple of volunteers who are helping out here and there, but yeah, it's a very small team.
Wow, like honestly, like that's very impressive. Like I feel like I mean, probably seen those headlines like one person billion-dollar company. I don't know if you because you're shipping fast. I don't know, or maybe I'm too slow. I can't. I, like kind of I feel like you're heading in the right way. Like and you're right. Like I think investors were when the money you don't need it, they would come to you. Like I did the fundraising route, like kind of where like kind of you kind of reach out to kind of I raised like some money from angel investors, but I would say it's still like not enough. Like yeah, fundraising is exhausting, and a lot of people these
Yeah.
days like they slap kind of AI on landing page and go pitch like kind of and like yeah, I think your route is kind of much we thank you like just for the next kind of probably like 5 minutes we have like or probably less we have like a fire shot basically like quick questions you can
Yeah.
answer kind of like briefly like so the first question is like what's your favorite for example AI model or tool that you use beside Dyad like
Yeah. I mean, I think the like one AI coding tool I use a lot is Cursor. And I built like a ton of Dyad using Cursor. And I think to me, like Cursor and like I think VS Code in general, like I think are just, really good models of like, okay, these are powerful tools, they're extensible. And I think there are aspects of it that I'm trying to emulate in Dyad, but also like, they're more geared towards engineers. So yeah.
yeah, speaking of cursor like I think last last night or 2 days ago, I see a lot of backlash around it. I don't know, against pricing or something. Some people got charged. Have you seen that story? I don't know, like
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
yeah. I don't know what's going on with
And
Cursor.
I think this is kind of like what we're mentioning, right? It's not just Cursor. There's a bunch of these, AI startups where there's this like realignment around the pricing, right? Because if you think about like the amount that you can use for Cursor for $20 a month is kind of incredible. And I think there's sort of, I think probably a need for sustainability as these companies are growing. So to me, like as someone on the other side, understanding the cost of these AI models, like I can totally understand why Cursor is making the moves. But on the other hand, you have a lot of these users who are sort of hooked on these like really attractive plans. And I think this is where you're going through that difficult realignment.
For sure. Like, next question. What's the biggest challenge of building local AI like this? I compared to.
Yeah. I mean, I think like one thing is, early on, I would just have because I work on a MacBook. I would just have so many bugs where like things work well on my computer, but it wouldn't work well on Windows. And then people started trying to do things on Linux, and it's not even just Windows is one kind of computer. Like there's 5 different ways to install Node.js in Windows, and I think there's this long tail of issues that you experience when people are running things locally. And again, as we talked about, like cloud-based builders, like they avoid all of that. But I think one thing is that like I think it's good to let people run on their own devices because at the end of the day, like people shouldn't have to be locked into running everything on the cloud. And I think in the long term, even though there's like the short term pain of like making things cross platform compatible, for example, now we try to run almost all of our integration tests against like Windows and Mac to make sure we catch these issues. I think in the long run, it's a good investment to do this.
For sure. Like, a next question: what's like most overrated myth about AI dev tools, or you see it, or
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I see is like you can go build this in one prompt, and I'm like, I guess the way like I build things, like I'm much more iterative, right? It's like even if I'm like again like building like a Bible reading app, right? There's just some things that like you have to try it out, right? You have to feel it as a user. It's like, okay, this animation doesn't feel quite right. It feels a little sluggish, or I want to like actually have this information pop up, right? And it doesn't matter what you're building. I think it's really hard, to perfectly conceive of what you're trying to do. So I think people should probably like, I totally understand. It's very memeable to say you built something in 90 seconds, but I think in reality, like what you want is a tool where it's like, okay, it's not just the first prompt that was good. It was the second and then the thousandth of prompt. And I've seen people actually having 1,000+ prompts building a single app in Dyad. And I think it's like, how can you have that be a good experience? Because you really want to iterate, right? It's like no one has a perfectly clear idea. If you don't have a perfectly clear idea, how will the AI have a perfectly clear idea? And I think just building a tool that can help you iterate and grow and explore, I think is like a pretty underrated area.
for sure. Like another question I wasn't even thinking about is about jobs, like software development jobs. What do you think about this question? Like every time, like AI gonna take our jobs. Like I'm for sure there is a lot of while we are
Yeah.
talking now, there is like some kind of like trying to kind of doing some optimization kind of in these models. Some people are doing data annotation, labeling, kind of like improving kind of the
Yeah.
coding. It's definitely going to affect. What are your thoughts on this one, like this topic?
It is interesting. So, like, as a little backstory, I basically was on paternity leave. I have two kids, and I have my second one's almost a year.
Congrats.
And I was on, oh, thank you. And when I was on paternity leave, for 6 months, like AI coding was basically starting to just blow up and taking over. And when I came back, my team had basically become very divided. Like half the team was like very pro AI. It's like, this is amazing. It's doing all these like incredible stuff. And then the other half was like anti AI. And I was like talking to my manager. I was like, just a week back in particular, he's like, why is the team so divided? And he was like, like the thing is like, like Google has had layoffs throughout the years, and there's this like underlying anxiety. I think especially amongst engineers of like this has traditionally been a really awesome job, and I think it will be. I'm pretty optimistic, but I think there's a lot of anxiety, understandably, by people who are saying like, what if AI does take away our jobs? And it doesn't help, when you have a bunch of big companies who are also doing job cuts, right when they're investing in AI. I think the way I see it is like for Dyad, like again, most of the users are not engineers, and those are the people who are really excited. Like it's these like small business owners, and they like can't afford to hire a team of engineers to build tools, but they have all these ideas that they want to do, and they're actually really useful and really interesting. And I think this is where AI opens a ton of opportunity, where like you could have software like you don't need maybe 1 million customers, maybe you have 1,000 customers. And that could be viable because you don't need like a team of 10 engineers to go build a tool, and you can actually have like just a person, maybe it's like a couple people building things that are really interesting. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that it'll create, but it is hard to say. Like it is kind of amazing how fast the AI coding models are getting, and I think it's like sometimes people are like, oh, it's bad, and they're looking at like last year's models, and when you look at this year, it's like, well, it's getting better, and if it gets better next year and the year after, right, it is kind of staggering and think about what there is. But I'm sort of on the side of like AI can do a lot of things, but does it have the taste? Like what is a good product, right? It's like that is very subjective and actually requires expertise in your domain, and it requires you thinking about what is the design, what is the right features, and those are things where you don't have a right or wrong answer. And I think that's where humans have so much value, because AI's there's just what is going to optimize towards. There's no right answer, so I think there's going to be a lot of potential there. So I'm overall optimistic.
Awesome, awesome. Will, thank you so much. Just one more, like, I would say, like, a last closing. Like, what's like kind of the next for Dyad, or any upcoming releases or features? Because I feel like you release a lot, and I would definitely like promote Dyad. I've been telling, like, even I told you, like, my girlfriend even using it, and like anybody I know, like, for example, ask me like, what do you use? Ah, just try Dyad. I still use Lovable and stuff, but like, how about any kind of future releases or anything you want to say to our audience and about Diet, or about where they follow you or like join your community if you
Yeah,
have?
yeah. Yeah, so you can check out that Dyad. You can download for free dyad.sh. There's a really active Reddit community, and I'm there all the time on Dyad builders. And the thing that we just released this week is Dyad beta. So now we actually have this beta version where you can get more frequent updates. You can try new features. And this is something I kind of learned, which is you don't know how things are going to run on everybody's different computer. People have different use cases, and by giving people a channel to get updates more frequently, I can get that feedback. So if you're willing to live on the bleeding edge, check out Dyad beta. There's also going to be Dyad stable, and again, we're going to ship releases, every week or two, getting things out there. But I'm excited to just get things out there even quicker for users and getting people's feedback. And there's a whole bunch more features that are coming up, and I'll have more to share there. I'll probably post it on Reddit, and I have a newsletter on the that you can subscribe to on the website. So yeah.
Awesome. Like that's cool. Like, Will, thank you so much for joining us. Go follow Will, and like I'm gonna share all the links below on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and everywhere. Like I feel like Will also. I think probably you should post these videos like onto kind of LinkedIn. I feel like you are not much social media person. Sorry, I feel like you
Yeah, I
probably you
need to
should.
do more.
Yeah, like at least a lot of people know. I think for product hunt, I think it was good. Like, but I think you got to catch on that kind of like traction, at least like on LinkedIn, probably on X or for
Yeah.
sure. Like, it's great stuff. Will, thank you so much.